Hello and welcome to another episode of The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. I am your host, Blaine Bartlett. Folks, this whole notion of the soul of business, I'm setting this up right now because we're going to be in a conversation with somebody here whom I think you are going to find absolutely fascinating. And yeah, I spent some time in a Japanese monastery during a period in my life, meditating as Zazen meditations, and the whole notion of Satori, kind of comes into play here, and the idea of enlightenment is one thing, but the idea of being abidingly awake is something else, because we live in a world that has time and space constraints, and there's a material reality that we have to navigate. But if we're not awake when we're navigating it, we can get ourselves into all kinds of mischief. And the idea of conscious capitalism, the idea of compassionate capitalism, both of these are predicated in large part on being able to tap into what I call the soul of a business. The Greeks had this way of describing the soul as being that piece of anything that enlivens everything, that actually brings life to everything. Even a rock has a soul. In that epistemology. So the idea of being able to tap into that. And when I was sitting, there were, I wish it had been much greater frequency, but there were moments where I just had this aha, where there was a settling. And I remember my sensei talking about Satori in the context of aha. It's kind of like where the veil parts and there's this realization that something else is present, something other than what I thought was present. And when we can tap into that unique piece of our business, that's something else that's present, that brings us to who we are, brings us to what's possible. There's nobody that can replicate that because it's unique to who we are. I mean, and that's for me kind of the secret sauce. If we can actually leverage that well. And the devil's in the details here, and the devil in this detail is that it's all about connection. Everything is connected. There is nothing that is separated, and that's part of the aha-ness. It's all connected. So our guest today, Sunny Vanderbeck, is the founding managing partner of an organization called Satori Capital. It's a venture capital group that is organized almost fanatically, and I'm going to just use that word here, around the notion of compassionate capitalism. And the organizing principle in large part has to do with business is the most powerful and the most pervasive force on the planet. How is it being used? What's it connecting to, and how is it being leveraged? Now, Sonny's got a varied background. He was a former military commander. He came out of Microsoft. He's founded a couple of firms. I mean, I won't go into all the detail. We can actually work that in as we kind of come into our conversation here. But I want to just welcome Sunny Vanderbeck.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Absolutely, my pleasure. The idea of Satori, Satori. Did I capture kind of the essence of what I'm assuming would have been some of the kind of the foundational founding principle when you kind of came up with not only the firm but also the name for the firm?
That's right. The name we thought was very important. So much so that we operated without a name for about a year and a half. We continued to look and continued to look. And I can still see the email that my co-founder sent to me that said, "Aha, I finally found it. It's this word Satori." And it was very clear to both of us when we found that word, it captured the spirit of what we were trying to do.
Go ahead.
Yeah, as a bit of background, part of how we got here, Randy and I had both been CEOs and founders of businesses. And we didn't like what we saw when we spoke with people in the capital markets, people that were, investors, venture capital, private equity, what have you. The most common pattern we saw was very short-term minded and only focused on money. And our experience as CEOs, and we both had a pretty good run, as CEOs was that the opposite behavior is what got us results. When we were thoughtful and mindful and cared about other humans and had a longer term perspective, and tried to do the right thing by our stakeholders, customers and suppliers and so forth, we got really extraordinary results. And when the world centered around this quarter's earnings and the P&L and money, sometimes it works and often it doesn't. And even when it does, it's no fun anyway. And so we, as entrepreneurs, we did a thing called business dating for like 3 or 4 years. We just met every Friday with no real agenda, knowing we were both CEOs of companies. And out of this conversation became this complaint. And you know how companies get started. Somebody complains.
Yeah.
Usually an entrepreneur starts complaining. I wish that the world were different in some way. And at some point, you can't stand it anymore. People ask, why did you start Satori? It's like an important question. And our answer is simply that we couldn't help it. The world needed a firm that understood that being thoughtful about how you're in relationship with all these stakeholders and having a longer term mindset was going to generate good in the world and was going to generate better outcomes too. And no amount of me up on stage with a PowerPoint is going to convince people that it's true. Only way we could do it was to just go show them.
Mm-hmm. Just go show them. Proof is in the pudding. That's what my grandfather used to say. And then my grandmother would slap his hand away from the pudding dish. This idea of a complaint, a complaint is really just a request in disguise. It's a request for something to be different. And I was struck by, we couldn't not do it. This notion of what's mine to do. That's for me where the soul starts to come into play a little bit. And I don't mean soul in a religious sense. And the folks that have listened to this show for a while are very familiar with me, making that disclaimer just about every time. I'm talking about this enlivening thing that makes me unique, that makes us unique. That is only the only thing that we can do is be who we are fully, and that soul seeks expression in ever bigger and ever greater ways. The idea of being able to move people's focus away from short-term profit, that quarterly mindset. Can you talk a little bit about the distinction that is, at least in my mind, the distinction between value extraction and value creation, which I think is what it is that you're really speaking to?
It is. One of the ways I try to explain conscious capitalism is that profit over the long term is actually a reflection of value creation for stakeholders, not a reflection of value extraction. It's not what can I take and what can I get away with. It's how much value can I create for these other people. And if you create a lot of value for customers and employees, you'll be rewarded with lots of profit and happy team members that stay and all of these things. This is a giving mentality at its core versus a taking mentality, which, about 30 seconds. And now you're talking about abundance mindset versus constraints. And so all of these concepts are very much cousins of each other. But the essence of it is, yes, very much about creation and creation of new value where none existed. And waking up every day and saying, how can I help? What can I do for these other people?
Boy, there's about 4 rabbit holes that just opened up in front of me here. Which one do I jump into? Venture capital. I've spent 40 plus years in business, and I've run all kinds of interference with venture capitalists and brought them into some of the clients that I've worked with and that kind of stuff. And the pejorative around vulture capitalism, is always kind of stuck in my mind. These are investors that come in for a short-term hit. Let's take it and work with it. Satori is a little different, and I've been on your website. I've kind of poked around a little bit, and you've got something that I think is actually relatively unique in that domain. Your core holding concept. This is, I've listened to an interview that you did some time ago, and I forget where it was at. It may have been a TED talk that you did, but you talked about taking time off the table, and that kind of informs the nature of your core holding concept. Can for those of you that are listening, particularly as you're looking at growing your organization, growing your business, and you're looking for a capital infusion, you want to be careful about how you bring people in.
Yeah.
Very,
Uh, yeah.
it's.
Hey, I know a guy that wrote a book about that, in fact.
I'll
Uh,
bet you do. Yeah.
so, yeah, look, there were
We'll
three
talk about
problems.
that in a minute too.
Yeah. There were three problems we were trying to solve with the genesis of Satori Capital. So one you mentioned was that this time horizon problem, which we can unpack more in a second. Um, the second one was this idea of the operator's advantage that, look, if I have been both in a business, I've done the work, and I use I here, but it's kind of a royal I. It's the nature of the
Mhm.
team we have here. It's one thing to sit in a board meeting and say, open a plant, close a plant, build a team, what have you. It's another thing entirely to do it. And
Yeah.
our belief is for the size companies on which we work, which in our case is kind of 5 to 50 million of annual profit. So these
Hmm.
are, decent sized businesses. Um, Having actually done the work will help us be better investors. And then the last piece was conscious capitalism. Like this bring this idea that there's more to this than just money. Those were the three ideas that we saw didn't exist in the investment business at large. And so this time horizon window is the most foundational one. Um, and it's not that other investors are necessarily good or bad people. You do have to understand the context in which they operate. Most capital that flows to private equity or venture comes from institutional places like pension funds.
Right.
And without trying to unpack that whole thing, their rules are by and large, we want our money back in 5 years
Yeah.
and our profit in 5 years too. So a big part of what we had to solve at Satori was figuring out, well, if most of the capital in the United States wants that result, how do I build a business that doesn't have that constraint, that can be an investor for not just 5 years, but maybe 10 or 15 or 25? As you described it, like, let's take time off the table. And what that doesn't mean is we sort of hang out for a long time. What
Yeah.
it means is the idea of building extraordinary amounts of value over a long period of time is very exciting. The compounders, it's those companies that can you grow at one of our portfolio companies has grown 20% a year for 20 years.
Wow.
Now, we haven't been an
Wow.
investor for 20 years. We've been there probably about 3. But the essence of it is like, why would you sell this business if it's amazing?
Yeah.
And the real answer from our industry, regardless of what anybody actually says, the real answer is because their customers, remember, these private equity firms and venture firms have customers. And it's
Hmm.
not you. Their customer is their investor. Their
Right.
customers have said, I want this time horizon. So you do have this sort of structural challenge in the market. And when you're able to take that off the table to say, we don't have that challenge, we think about it. Here's what changes. It changes the conversation we have in the board meeting, because our conversation goes from, well, we've got 18 months left, hurry up and do whatever short-term behavior thing you need to do to make it look better, to we're just owners. What would make this the best version of itself? Like, that's what we're trying to do with these businesses, is how could they become the best version of themselves? And sometimes that takes a little longer. In fact, I'll
Hmm.
give you a specific story. One of our portfolio companies, we had been an investor for 4 or 5 years. And the leadership team and the sort of second and third generation family business, they were still there. They came to us and said, hey, our largest customer, who's also our most profitable, has asked us to open a plant nearby their headquarters in another state. Well, with my owner hat on, that's very exciting. With my sort of short term, I've already owned it for 4 or 5 years. We're probably going to sell in 6 months. You would never do that project because a project, those are big scale. It's, 3 years to get your money back. It takes a
Yeah.
long time to break even. And you're like, why would I ever do that? Um, you know how the punchline turns out. The company did very well with opening that plant, and it made it a very attractive target for other people, and blah blah blah. The story ends. Little Red Riding Hood, what have you. Um, so the point being, it allows us to have conversations and make decisions that only owners can make. If you're just what does John Mackey call them? I heard him call them hitchhikers one time. I think that's
Hitchhikers, yeah.
fair. And look, I will acknowledge venture. This is one of those places where venture capital does get a little different than private equity stage stuff. Like private equity stage, for context, is profitable businesses, where most venture-backed stuff is not profitable. That whole ecosystem is built around time and moving fast, and look, there's a lot of dollar chasing, and not as much business building as well. It's like it's a little different mindset.
It's a different conversation.
Yeah, and so I don't envy that problem, because you also run into this founder owner has said, well, my projections are the company's going to grow 50% every 6 months for the next 5 years, and a valuation gets built on that, and like you actually have to go that fast or it doesn't work. But this idea of time is the foundational one. I don't know how to do this other stuff if I can't think about this like an owner, not like a house flipper.
The nature of life is evidenced in nature. Nature grows, and all of nature honors the desire to be more, to have more, and to do more. Life thrives when it's allowed to grow. And ideally, thriving is what we also, all of us, want to be able to do. Unfortunately, at some stage in life, most people find themselves settling into what I can only call a rut. And a rut is nothing more than a coffin with the ends kicked out. You want to quickly get out of any rut that you find yourself in. When you stop growing, that's when the coffin starts to appear. The simple truth is this, and this is true for everything in nature. You're going to die. I'm going to die. Every one of us dies. So the question we need to come to grips with is not, are we going to die? The question nature asks us to answer is, are we truly living? That's what motivation is about. It's the desire to move. It's the desire to grow and to excel. Have I lived? How have I lived? I'd love for you to take advantage of my Leadership Mindset Masterclass. It's all about providing you with the tools to ensure thriving for yourself and for those around you. Register today to receive the free introduction video and find out more about this acclaimed program. You'll also receive a copy of my international #1 bestseller, Compassionate Capitalism, A Journey to the Soul of Business. I'm Blaine Bartlett, and I look forward to helping you thrive. Time is such a ubiquitous, it's pervasive. There's nobody that doesn't have it impacting them in some way, shape, or form. And this is, I go all the way back to my introduction here about being abidingly awake. We tend to go asleep at the wheel, I think, in not only our personal lives, but also in our business lives. And we look up and it's just around that next bend. We forget that we're on a journey here, this long-term journey. That can kind of come into play here. And there's two pieces that I want to just unbundle a little bit here. One has to do with kind of what's the purpose of business, and the other one would have to do with this whole context of time, or the purpose of business, but within that context of time, what's the conversation that is held? Because the conversation becomes the relationship. So like my relationship with the purpose of my business is embedded in the conversations that I'm having about the business, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I have, and this is where I think most people go to sleep, is that they don't really understand what the purpose of business is. And I'm just kind of soapboxing here a little bit
Yeah.
because I'd like to get your take on this. For me, the purpose of business, and the tip of the hat to Milton Friedman here, the purpose of business is not to make a profit. But, profit's necessary to stay in business, obviously. But the purpose of business, as far as I can tell, is to enhance the likelihood of thriving for all concerned on the planet, to enhance the likelihood of thriving. So if you come in contact with my service or my product, and you get the experience of I get to thrive, not just survive, not just to eke out another breath, but I get to actually have the possibility of thriving here, people are going to beat a path to my door, and profit won't be a concern. Now I have to run the business intelligently, but the purpose of business, having that as kind of the focal point, and then the conversations that we have internally revolving around how are we bringing thriving to the marketplace, as in the unique way that we do it. How does that land in the way that, first of all, does it land for you? And then secondly, if it does, how does it inform your investment strategies?
No, it does. It lands for me very much. I started one business just for money, and I hated it, and it didn't work very well.
Yeah.
It's just kind of funny how that works. And again, so people ask again, why did I start Data Return? So my first business, I quit Microsoft. I had this crazy idea in '96 that people were going to buy stuff on the internet. They were going to use this computer network thing to talk to each other and buy stuff.
What are you smoking? Yeah.
Yeah, right. It was crazy. And well, I was pretty young too. So mostly I got, oh, that's so sweet. He's a little computer guy. And why did I start it? I couldn't help it. Same thing. I couldn't help it. The world needed this. And that idea of meeting an unmet need is a real thing. And when you lose sight of that, and it just becomes money and transactions, then you kind of lose the soul of it. And something changes when you lose that. I think, and I'm not going to pick on anyone in particular, but I'm going to pick on a group for sure. Most of our complaints sort of socially about capitalism, they're not actually about capitalism. They're about whatever the largest 500 companies in the world are doing. That's not capitalism.
No,
right?
It's not.
Soul's gone. And again, there are outliers where that's not true, but it's kind of truthy. It's truthy enough for me to say it. Did we leave it better than we found it?
Yeah.
Sometimes, you wonder, well, how do you measure conscious capitalism? Or how do you measure success at Satori, or even in your life as a human? And my starting place is, did I leave it better than I found it?
Yeah.
It'll never be perfect. Look, I'm an entrepreneur. Every time something gets really awesome, all that means to me is I can see how much more awesome it could be. I have to be careful with that blessing and curse. But I do know that I can leave it better than I found it. And so sometimes we try to chase things like purpose, where maybe you don't need consumer brand purpose. I've seen people try to sort of artificially jam a bunch of corporate speak onto a company. Look, if you make rivets that go in chairs, you're not going to have a purpose that looks like we're going to transform the world economy or, solve hunger. But you know what you are going to do? Every company that makes good jobs and good products makes the world a little bit better.
Yeah.
Right? You think about the 10-year-old kid whose parents come home from work and they hate their job. It has no meaning. They feel like, work is nearly slavery. They're barely getting by. You've got sort of that versus somebody comes home and they're excited about the work they did, regardless of what it was. And they felt like somebody cared about them at work and that there was, in fact, meaning in their life. What lessons are we teaching this 10-year-old kid about how to be in the world? We forget as leaders and owners sometimes the dinner table conversation is about us. The things we do every day on a Tuesday, particularly when we're not awake and present with what we're doing, that's what your team talks about when they go home is you And what you did, good or bad, that's what they're doing. And so every company has an impact on the world. Might be good, might be bad. There are a few neutrals. And so one of my cautions here is like, don't try to find a thing that's not there and have this sort of business word bingo. I had a friend, it's a good story on this end of it. He was the CEO of an injection molding company. And he went down this journey of purpose. And it's sort of a cousin to the soul of the business. And he really struggled because he did a thing for customers and they valued it, but it wasn't changing the world like on its sort of big talk about it on TV thing. He spent a couple of years trying to be really thoughtful about it. And he's one of those people that's just not tolerant of BS, and the BS stuff would start to come up and he's like, yeah, that's not real. Like, we're not doing that. And what he ended up realizing at the end of it was the core purpose around that business, the spark, the spirit, was actually about his employees. He was the largest employer in a small town. And the jobs that he created for those team members gave them prosperity in their life.
Yep.
And that was the impact on the world that mattered more than the rest. Did the market need his company to exist? Of course it did. And all of these other things. Did he make it? Fine. But the real moment happened there. We did some video work with one of our portfolio companies recently. And we had a team member at the portfolio company say, we had done a lot of work on a talent ladder and sort of this idea of prosperity and being your best self and sort of letting people grow meaningfully in their careers at the company. It's kind of, blue collar work. And this guy said, the company has afforded me the opportunity to give my family a life that I didn't have growing up.
That's all you need.
I'm like, man, I got a juice for that. I got at least 6 months worth of go hard out of that. Just that one comment. So sometimes on that end of the spectrum, like maybe it's just about your team, or there's a customer need where you actually really make a deep difference for your customer. Like, don't try to make it BS. Now, I will say some companies on the other end, we have a portfolio company that helps the bottom 3 to 5% of a high school class graduate. So these are kids that are very challenged. They are, without intervention, very unlikely to graduate.
Yep.
And that's what they do. And I think last year they probably graduated a couple thousand students. These are kids that look, they asked one of these kids, they said, did you ever think you were going to graduate? And what he said was, graduate? I didn't think I was going to be alive. Go, ooh, okay. So look, some companies, the thing they do in the world, it's right there in front of you. And in other companies, you may have to look for a while. But business does have a spirit or a soul.
Yes. And
when you lose that, you lose maybe the most important thing.
Yeah. Oh, high five.
Thank you.
That's typically I'd be taking a break right now. I'm not going to do that because I don't want to interrupt the flow. We're just going to keep running through here. You're pretty close to the ground, I think, because a lot of your clients, the portfolio, firms that the firms that you work with, tend to be first generation founders, family businesses, that sort of thing. And as far as I'm concerned, they're kind of the point. You mentioned this. Capitalism is not the big 500. Yeah, capitalism is, the mom and pop store on the corner. I mean, there are changes that are happening, more and more rapidly all the time, all around us, and not just climate change and economic change and political change, but there's just changes that are occurring, and the rate of change seems to be problematic for a lot of folks in terms of their ability to get in front of it. But I'm curious here. For me, the problem with change is not necessarily the change itself. It's the disruption to existing relationships that the change causes. And when you're working, with some of your firms to take them to that next level, to actually kind of get them set up for that next level success, what are some of the relational shifts that you find they need to pay attention to that they're not necessarily equipped to pay attention to. They may have the skill, they may have the education to handle the visible change, but it's the disruption to the relationship that they stub their toe on. What do you notice there, if anything? I'm just I know I'm asking this question through a very specific lens because this is where I do a lot of my work. So
yeah, I will start with do you care about this person sitting in front of you? Just start there. If I care about someone, a vendor, now I can care at different amounts, at different impacts, and different levels of relationships. But if my starting place in a conversation, and again, this touches on something we mentioned earlier, is what can I get? I will have a wildly different relationship, especially when there's stress on the relationship, than what can I give? And so if you can orient yourself to how can I create value for this other person? Now, the context of course it will create value for me. But start there first, then the rest of it gets a lot easier. I wrote an article for a journal called the Mergers and Acquisitions Journal. It's kind of an industry deal. It's pretty technical, pretty boring. It's not accounting stuff, but it's a cousin of the accounting stuff.
It's kind of right up there, huh?
And the article was about karma is a real thing in business. And they accepted it. You could just watch the tops of people's heads getting blown off with this thing. They were like, what? Like, they didn't even know what to think about it. But, look, we had this period of time where it was like take, not give. And these relationships all require reciprocity. But I promise you, if you build trust in a relationship and weird stuff happens because the world changes in some odd way, you can give each other the benefit of the doubt and go from there. Yeah. And if you're trying to figure it out, you can figure it out together. We had one of our companies paid their supplier more. Why would you do that? Well, turns out, and we'll run out of time to really unpack the whole story, but the essence was they were buying a commodity product from this supplier. And their deepest strategy was to be able to move up market. Like if you sell a commodity, the thing you want most in the world is to add some value to the product so that you don't get clobbered by the lowest bidder every Tuesday.
Right.
They had clearly stated, we want to move up the value chain. We want to do more work for our customers. And so our company went to them and said, we want you to do more work for us. We will pay you more for your product if you can do X, Y, and Z. Now, everybody in the industry thought they were crazy. Like, oh, that's crazy. You can never make money. What they didn't know is there was a $30 million piece of machinery that instead of our company buying it, the supplier bought for us to do the work we wanted them to do. And by the way, now I'm also the highest margin customer. So even when the finance crowd shows up, I'm now the highest margin customer. So when there wasn't enough of the product to go around, guess who got it? We did.
Yeah.
But I didn't start with what can I take? Like it was what is this person trying to accomplish in their business, in their life, in their world? And that give me a foundation of trust and we'll figure it out.
Yeah, I'm grinning from ear to hear about this. Yeah, I've got a media firm that works with me. And there's a whole backstory about why, but I had to reposition myself after COVID, reposition what we were doing. 95% of our book of business disappeared overnight. Yeah, when COVID hit, because most of it was international consulting.
Oh, wow.
In person. So had no social media presence or anything. So I finally found this little boutique firm in the Bay Area. And they took me on, and they were kind of a startup. And I said, here's what I want to do. And, the first of this year, actually a couple of months ago, I sat down with this lovely woman who's the founder and CEO of the company. I love this person. She's just extraordinary. I said, you need to raise my rates. She said, what? I said, no, you need to raise my rates. Because what I'm asking you to do now, You will probably do it for what you're billing me because that's what we agreed to. But you need to raise your rates because there's a reciprocity involved here. But more than that, you need to be you need to be in a position to do what I'm going to be asking.
Yeah, you need them to thrive.
Yeah, to thrive. So, and she just very happily raised my rates. She says, "I wish I had more clients like you."
Yeah, I think it was in Confessions of an Ad Man. The author made the point that in service businesses, the leaders of the service business only have one client they can think about on the drive, in the shower, when they wake up in the morning. There's only space for one. So the harder you negotiate, the less likely you are to be that person. And if you, sometimes you don't need extraordinary outcomes, but if extraordinary outcomes from a service will make a difference for you, you want to be the one they think about in their extra time. They're on vacation, sitting at the beach, and they have an idea for you because they're thinking about you. So the amount of goodwill and extra energy and on the margin you get from that, and having a supplier thrive. We had a supplier at Satori come to us about a year ago and say, "Hey, I just want you to know, both of my kids I put through college because of our relationship." How cool is that? Like, and we feel blessed to be in it. We get a ton of value out of the relationship. He works so hard for us. Like, what an amazing way to have a relationship. That's not quite the same as how a lot of business relationships work.
Relationship is all there is at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Folks, I'm going to have to bring this one to a close. Sunny, I'd love to have you back on. We've got a couple of other shows that we do. My partner, David Meltzer, and I do an office hours thing. It's on Apple TV. And you would be an incredible fit. And the story that you bring would be an incredible fit for that show. So I'm going to be reaching back out to you. And if you're interested, we'll get you on a couple of other shows.
Right.
Because
I'll look forward to it.
What you guys are up to is amazing.
Yeah. And in the interim, I mentioned it earlier, I wrote a book. We should hit that. Your audience may want to hear about it.
They will.
Yeah.
Selling without selling out. Okay. I've actually got the title right here. Give me 8 bars on that one real quick.
Yeah, so
take as much time as you need the next 5 minutes to fill it out.
Look, I can do it pretty briefly. I sold my first company to the wrong people. I got lucky and I got a shot to buy it back and get a do-over on it. I wanted to write the book that I wished I could have read 20 years ago. There was no one telling me, no one around me, lawyers, accountants, bankers. That's all money and risk and finance stuff. No one was telling me things like figure out what you care about and who you care about and get clear enough to write it down so that you know if you found it. So what happens for us, we spend 5, 10, 20 years, 30 years of our life building these businesses. And then when it gets to the end, we trade it like it's a baseball card. The book is, here's how to not do that. Here's how to take an investor or sell your business in a way that's consistent with your values, that gets what you want for your stakeholders. You are allowed to want whatever you want. You can want, don't change the dress code. You can do that. You just have to ask for it. But if you don't ask for it, you're not going to get it. So the book is about how to do that, and how to get an investor or a sale in a way that's consistent with your values.
All right, folks, pick this book up, and I apologize profusely for neglecting to weave that into what we were doing. I just got enthralled with what we were doing.
Oh, no worries.
So my bad on that. The book, again, is Selling Without Selling Out. Sunny Vanderbeck is the author. You'll find it on all of the regular outlets, I'm sure, Amazon, take your pick, that kind of stuff. Is it available as an Audible?
It is. I have an Audible that I actually ended up narrating myself.
All right.
Look, a lot of it is stories about real CEOs and real life and things that happened to me. And until you've been there, you kind of can't get how important that moment is. And if you want to reach me personally, sunnyvanderbeck.com is the easiest way to find me.
Okay, I'll put that in the show notes. as well as Satori Capital, for those that are looking to find a way to figure out more about what you're doing, satoricapital.com. Folks, as always, thank you for listening. And as always, my admonition to you is find a way in your life to be a center of distribution, not a center of accumulation. You're going to find your life works a whole lot better when you're distributing rather than accumulating. Take care.